If every decision you make is just to optimize the average ease of the next year, I don't think you're going to get what you want out of life. Like if you're open to the fact that, hey, if I do this, I might have more volatility this next year, like it gives you a place to maneuver. Whereas if you're always optimizing for ease, you can't maneuver at all. You're just on that path.
Welcome to the Mountain Tough Podcast, brought to you by Sig Sauer. What is up, everyone? I am Dustin Diefenderfer, founder and CEO, and welcome back to the Mountain Tough Podcast. We are so glad that you are here. We love seeing you come back week after week, diving into these episodes, sharpening your mindset, and really it is our goal to always bring you an inspiring guest where we unpack what makes them tick, what makes them operate, and unpack that toolbox of mindset and mental tools that you can apply so that you can live that virtuous, abundant life. If you are a new or a loyal listener, and if you have a second and you can rank or leave a review on the Mountain Tough Podcast, those do mean the world to us at Mountain Tough, and the rankings and the reviews allow these episodes to get out to more people with the algorithm so the episodes can get out and transform more lives. If you haven't checked out the Mountain Tough app yet, podcast listeners do get a 6-week free trial code. So that's a 14-day free trial plus a whole additional free month training on Mountain Tough Plus. That is the code MTNTOUGH. All caps, all one word. So if you want to check out Mountain Tough on the app, do some of our physical, mental, spiritual, or nutritional training, you can do that for 6 weeks for free with the code MOUNTAINPOD, MTNPOD. All you need to do to activate that is go to mountaintough.com, click Start Free Trial, then enter the code MOUNTAINPOD for those 6 weeks free. Transitioning now to today's guest. Today I get the chance to sit down and chat with Cliff Gray. Cliff is an awesome dude. He puts out a tremendous amount of content on YouTube around hunting skills, and he has a really interesting background that we dive into today. And I love the conversation so much because I see parallels in my life for sure, where Cliff was an outdoorsy kid. He was in the outdoors all the time, running around the woods of Colorado, but he wanted to do what the world was telling him to do, and that was go get a college degree and work in corporate America. So he did that. He actually went to Stanford and then to Booth, got some degrees, got this amazing career in the financial trading sector, and really decided that he was pretty miserable, even though on paper he had everything that the world tells you to get. He had this high-paying job. He had a driver. He was crushing it in the financial sector, but his life was not fulfilled. He was not happy. So he bailed, jumped ship, and actually went back to Colorado and bought an outfitting business and guided and outfitted for over a decade. That's where he got his fulfillment, his adventure, his purpose, his mission back in his life. And he continues to do that. He continues to look for what's kind of hard, what's adventurous, and he's going to pursue that. So it's an amazing conversation. If you're looking to kickstart, jumpstart your life, if you're stuck in a job that maybe you're not super stoked on, this is a conversation you're not going to want to miss. So stand by for my conversation with the Cliff Gray. Let's start with your childhood and kind of what that looked like, and then I know you went and got those degrees, but then you also went into the financial sector for a little while.
So yeah, a lot of people ask me about that because I don't have like the traditional, I guess, background as an outfitter or guide that put me into this career path. I guess in some ways I do because my father was an outfitter. He guided. I was always around like wilderness stuff, particularly like the livestock part of it, like the packing horses and mule part of it. That's always been a part of my lifestyle. But I have kind of more of a, like mainstream educational background. And I think I, it's an interesting question because people ask me like, okay, so you became an outfitter and guide in your late 20s, mid 20s, but before that, I went to Stanford, I went to University of Chicago, have like, by, not to sound like egotistical or anything like that, but most people view like a pretty, I guess like high ranking education,
Yep.
with those degrees. And so I've actually reflected on it a lot as I have gotten older. And
Mm-hmm.
because I've questioned it myself, like why did I choose to do something that was, I guess, in some ways harder, Dustin, like physically going back into the outfitting business and guiding, there's that component of it. Just like there's no way you're going to run an outfitting business like sitting at a desk,
It's
right? So
physical.
yeah, there's that component of it, but there's also the economic component of it. The reality is, when I got back into guiding and outfitting, um, I could have made 5 times as much money in an office job, right? So I debated in my own mind, like thinking about why I chose to go down that path a lot. And I think that I've really, since I sold my outfitting business, now it's been 3 seasons. I ran it for 1 season after I sold it. I think I've
Mm-hmm.
actually had time to reflect on that, man, and be like very honest with myself why that was. And I think the reality is that I grew up as a rural kid, man. Like kind of more of like the background of somebody that would, have a career in hunting, right? Like I
Yep.
hunted all the time as a kid. I was like a feral kid. I think not really. I've actually even talked to my mom about it before now because I have kids now. I don't think my parents on purpose like had me as a free range kid that was always hunting and that sort of thing. I think they had to because they both
Yep.
worked. Like
Yep.
both my parents worked their ass off, man. Um, when I was a kid, so 11, 12 years old, pretty normal for me to go hunting every other day after school for 2, 3 hours and no cell phones and all of that, like a very different world. It amazes me because I can't imagine doing that with my own kids now.
It's
And
crazy
they're
how
reaching that age.
I
You know what
know.
I mean? Um, so I had that background. Like if you probably met me when I was 15 or 16, you'd be like, "Oh, it makes sense that this guy dedicated his life to being an elk hunting outfitter." You know what I mean? But I don't know when I developed it, and it could have been when I was a kid, maybe my family's economic situation or whatever. But man, when I was 16, 17, 18 years old, I did not want to be poor,
Mm.
period. Like in my life. And it became, I think being real transparent and honest about it, it became like an obsession. Like I didn't want to be poor. I was always taken care of well as a kid, and it wasn't like I was from a struggling family, but I saw my parents like improve their situation as I was a kid. Like part of it we were poor, part of it we were doing all right. I was always taken care of. I had great parents, but I had like I had poverty around me. I guess
Yep.
let's say that, right? And I
Yep.
and I I just for some reason built this chip on my shoulder that I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I really wanted to solve that problem. And what's weird, I can't pinpoint it, really, Dustin, but both my brothers have it too.
Hmm.
And we've talked about it. It's like we just decided like, hey, like
Do not
I
want to
don't
be
want to be
that.
poor,
Yeah.
It's as
Crazy.
simple as that. And
Yeah.
so I think as a young guy at that age, 17, 18 years old, that became my priority. It wasn't like it wasn't following this dream in the outdoors. And in some ways, I'm going down this long path for you because I think that was where maybe I was a little misguided, I guess, right? Because when I entered that world, I went to Stanford and I was very focused on like quantitative finance, very like right brain, as nerdy as you can get, computer science. It's like the
Crazy.
peak of the financial world where that was a world when, if you were working at Facebook or Google, you were like a slouch. You know what I mean? Everybody wanted to go be a trader on Wall Street, go work at a hedge fund. It was like a different era of time. And
Yep.
so I got caught up in that. And I was, at those type of schools, like there's very much a push for that, right? Like whatever's the hot thing and where the money's at, that's where, a competitive person wants to be. So
Yep.
I went down that path and I'm not, I think I'm putting it a little bit in a little bit more negative light than it was. Like I enjoyed it, man. Like I enjoyed the intellectual stimulation. I love the trading part of the financial world when I was in it. It was very rapid. I was around I mean, to be honest with you, Justin, I was like when I came out of Stanford and started working in that world, I was surrounded with guys in the finance world that shouldn't have been for the better good of the world. They should not have been in finance. They should have
Mm-hmm.
been making rockets to go to Mars or curing cancer or something like that. But I mean, they were the smartest people that I knew were in that business at that time. So I enjoyed that part of it, and I enjoyed the competitive nature of it. But man, the minute I was in that world, well, not the minute, but 2, 3 years of living in that world, if you're like an outdoors kid and you've been surrounded by hunting and just always in outdoors, like you can't really shake it because you have to live in an urban environment. You
Yep.
know what I mean?
Yep.
It's kind of like crazy to think about, but I was like a 22-year-old kid, and I had like a driver who'd pick me up. You know what I mean? I was like, it wasn't quite like Wall Street the movie, but it sure as hell felt like it. You know what I
Jeez.
mean? Like it was, I can't believe the kind of that kind of world that I lived in for a couple of years. And it was great, man. But I there's a lot of different things that went on. I met my girlfriend at the time who became my wife now.
Mm-hmm.
We've been happily married for a long time now. But at that time, I think, she came into my life. I wasn't taking care of myself all that well. And I've always been like an outdoors kid. It's crazy, Dustin. Like I look back at pictures of that time and I just like, I hate to say it, but it was just skinny. I've always been like a thin guy, but I look at pictures of me and I'm like, I look like a skinny fat ghost. You
Skinny
know what I
fat.
mean?
Skinny
And it's
fat.
funny because I reflect on it. I remember just not feeling all that good, and
Mm-hmm.
I had everything, man. I was paid well, all the metrics that you can think of, man, that people think of a career. Like I was killing it by cultural metrics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some business things that went on that were all good. I had a business with my brother in the financial space. We kind of paired off doing our own thing. We were funded again, like something that was a great accomplishment at the time. But I think just the urban environment, the lifestyle, all the things that went around that wore on me a little bit. But really, it was just like a lack of, or maybe an obsession with that and the financial component of it and trajectory in that world that I wasn't taking care of myself mentally. I wasn't, doing these things that I've always enjoyed as a kid, all of that. And really with it in like a 3 month period, I jumped ship. I
Mm.
sold my part of the business. I uh I had a small non-compete, so I couldn't do some of the stuff that I had developed like in the finance world and I was doing. I retained one client for kind of like a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I'd moved back to Colorado. Like just me and my girlfriend at the time, we moved back to Colorado, back where I was born. And
Man.
with the idea, honestly, of being like, dude, I'm just gonna go skiing for 2 years, figure it out, and then and then skiing and hunting, basically skiing in the winter, and then I'd be back elk hunting and that sort of stuff, and be back to the same reality that I grew up in as a kid, and then I fell into the outfitting deal. Really, it's we can get into that too if you want, but does that kind of answer your question, man?
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. It's so interesting because it's pretty easy to get seduced down the wrong path and kind of chase what the world, our society is telling us to do, especially from the materialistic standpoint. So, I think it's even more of a pressure now than ever before because
Sure.
we're bombarded all day, every day from many different angles to chase a lot of things that are not going to actually make us happy, but the world is telling us they're going to lead to happiness and fulfillment. And it's the money, possession, sex, fame that is being pushed down on us from all different media outlets, that those are the
Sure.
things we should pursue. But a lot of people, most of us go down that route and don't jump ship in time. And then like you were probably fairly close to that where folks get in that kind of golden handcuff situation where they know in their heart and in their spirit that they're not really supposed to be there, but they get in that golden handcuff situation where they don't have enough drive to get out of that and actually go where their heart's calling them to go. So it's amazing you were able to recognize that first and then make it happen secondly.
Yeah. Dude, I think you nailed it. Like, and I can't take, I would love to tell you, Dustin, that I was just, stronger will-powered guy. And I knew like, hey, I got to get out of this situation. I think part of it was circumstance. You know what I mean? Like I had this epiphany in my life that, hey, dude, I'm not taking care of myself. And honestly, part of it was hunting and fishing and stuff. Like it's probably going to sound petty to a lot of people, but I was like, dude, I haven't hunted in 2 years, or I'd go on hunting trips and they'd just be like, they wouldn't be like I remembered the adventure. So that literally was a motivating factor for me. And that all came in a period of time where I still had some flexibility, right? And so it's easier to make that decision, if you have some flexibility. As my life has progressed and I've actually made like similar decisions in my life since then, I think that every time I do it, even though, my life, my responsibilities, taking care of my wife, taking care of my kids, all the different financial responsibilities I have now, those decisions are harder. Like if I had the responsibilities I have now back at that first time I did it, I don't think it would be as easy for me to do it. But now that I've done it several times, it's a lot easier. That might sound a little woo-woo to people, but it's like exposure therapy. If you start to realize that, hey, if I take this risk and then, yeah, maybe it pays off good, maybe it pays off bad, whatever. Either way, it allows you to make that choice a whole lot. It's a lot easier for somebody who's done it a few times. And I notice that amongst, my, people I know and friend groups and that sort of thing too, is that somebody who gets exposure to making those kind of decisions in life, they become progressively easier for them to do that.
I agree.
It's really an interesting it's an interesting dynamic. But the golden hand, the thing that's interesting about this whole monetary thing, materialism thing, all of that is I'm not, I would call myself very much a capitalist. You know what I mean? I think that I think the American dream is phenomenal. I think that all the things that have improved our quality of life have to do with that system. But there's like this, you nailed it when you said that it's like it progressively catches up. I know guys that I work with, Dustin, who I know for a fact because I talk to them. They're good friends from, now 20 years ago who stayed in that same career path. And they, like, if you looked at my net worth and their net worth, you're talking like 100 times. They have 100 times the net worth I do. And when I talk to them privately, they're like the spectrum of our physical health, our psychological health, like I'm way above them. And I'm not trying to brag or anything. It makes me reflect on like, okay, you can't shun, having things and taking care of your financial responsibilities. That's not the way in this life. But man, you got to find a happy medium or you're going to end up in a path that you're not that happy, and maybe you're not getting as much out of this life as you want. I don't know how old you are, Dustin, but the dynamic that I'm going to die someday has hit me in the last like 6, 7, 8 years, man.
Man. Yeah. Life is short. It's so short and it does go by like a vapor. And Brian Johnson, he's an author of the book Hydrate, and he talks about really one of the number one virtues, the number one virtue we should all be measuring how we're doing off of is zest, which is so helpful to me because he describes it as like our zest for life, our zest for getting up every morning is really the gauge of how we're doing mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, nutritionally, because that zest gauge is going to go up and down based off what you're pouring into your life, what's filling your cup and what's draining your cup. And I think that's what you see with some of your peers that are not your peers, but some of those guys that are still in that career is they might have that insane net worth, but their zest is down, and their zest is down because they're not pursuing the outdoors. They're not filling their lives with adventure. They don't have like a mission to chase, a battle to fight, especially when you bring the outdoor element into it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I've seen that. I've seen the exact dynamic you're talking about in I mean, I've been blessed to guide a lot of people who are real financially successful, and a big proportion of them actually are pretty happy guys because they actually
Mm-hmm.
find like a happy, they could just be obsessed with elk hunting or sheep hunting or spear fishing or whatever. And it's like I don't want to pinpoint it all on that, but I think it matters. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like having something to live for. My dad used to always say this, and it's gonna only relate to a small little segment of people. But my dad grew up around horse racing,
Mm-hmm.
and like that's just was always a part of his life, part of my grandpa's life, all of that. And they used to have this saying that, hey man, like you never see a guy die who has a 2-year-old colt that he thinks is gonna run real fast,
Yeah.
because he's living for the fact, like, because like 3-year-olds when they hit that's like the peak of their racing.
Yeah.
And it's just like it encompasses the same idea. Like if you got something that keeps you excited, you know what I mean? You keep rocking. So I totally.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Let let's fast forward into your outfitting career. So you outfitted for a decade or more.
Yeah. Yeah, guided an outfit. I mean, I owned an outfitting business. I'm trying to think about, I think for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I fell into it, man. People always, because there's a lot of people who want to get into that business, or they think they do. They want to guide or they want to outfit. And so I get questions about it a lot. So I didn't have the intention of going back into it. I did have I like entrepreneurship, man. Like I like growing businesses and that sort of thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
was back in Colorado, figuring I'd start another business, maybe outside of finance, maybe something totally unrelated. And I remember there were these permits in kind of the adjacent wilderness area to where my dad outfitted when I was a little bitty kid. And I always knew about it. They were big, scalable permits. The elk herd was big there. It was always kind of like when I was a kid, it was like those guys made it. You know what I mean? They had a big enough outfitting business to make a pretty good living, a lot of kind
Mm-hmm.
of prestige around that or whatever. And then when I came back there, as an adult, I had learned that those permits had pretty much, like, the business had fell apart for a bunch of different reasons. One of the guys had died, a whole bunch of really non-related reasons to the operation of the business. It had traded a couple hands. And
Mm-hmm.
one day I drove up there. It was like third rifle season. I drove up there with my girlfriend and in my Jeep, and I ran into old guy walking a lame mule down the switchback. I started talking to him about that outfitting business, and he's like, "Oh yeah, man, like we're only doing 2 or 3 hunts now." And these were guys that were doing, a couple hundred hunts at some point. And I got to talking to him, I realized that he owned it, but he just kind of owned it temporarily because he was an adjacent landowner or whatever.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I was like, "Man, you ever think about selling it?" And he's like, "You better effing believe it, man." And in 3 weeks, I bought it.
No
And
way.
that got me on that track. And really, if I'm being totally transparent, I bought it thinking it would be like a seasonal hobby, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turned into a passion for growing it and optimizing it and all that good stuff. So I grew it kind of back to where it was historically, doing 150 hunts or so there. And then I over the years I'd leased some ranches around. I had a booking slash kind of outfitting business in British Columbia for several years. I doing a bunch of spring bear stuff, and I
Mm-hmm.
built that business up too. So it was fun, man. I enjoyed it for a whole bunch of reasons. It was a wild adventure. I could tell you that.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second and talk to you about nutrition and supplementation. There are a plethora of options when it comes to supplements that can be kind of overwhelming, so I wanted to let you guys know what I do take. So in the mornings, I am taking the Mountain Ops greens and the collagen right when I wake up, and that has been a game changer. I don't eat a lot of vegetables throughout the day, so adding those greens in the morning is quick and efficient. and I can really feel the collagen. In addition, I do enhance my workouts. My Mountain Tough training sessions are quite difficult, and so I do like to take the Enduro. It gives you a cardio enhancement that you can actually feel. And then I also like a little caffeine with my workout, so I'm taking the Mountain Ops Ignite. Lastly, it's really important that you are getting enough protein and recovering after these difficult sessions. What I do know is even following a strict whole foods diet, I'm not getting nearly enough protein on most days unless I take a supplement. So I do take the Mountain Ops protein after my workout to make sure that I'm hitting about 1 gram per body weight for a functional athlete. So taking the Mountain Ops protein with some creatine after my workouts has been huge. Those are the products I am taking and that I recommend. The Mountain Ops team is giving Mountain Tough podcast show listeners an exclusive discount to their products. It is a great deal. So for a first-time purchase on mountainops.com, you do get 20% off. All you need to do is go to mountainops.com and then use the code MountainTough at checkout. That's MTNTOUGH, all caps, all one word. Apply that as your promo code at checkout, and you're going to get 20% off your first order. You've been listening to the Mountain Tough podcast. Well, it's so cool how it was kind of serendipitous how you found it, just running into that old guy coming down a trail with a mule, and he happens to be the owner. Is wild.
Right.
Let's dive into what you saw across all those years, all those hunters. I would love to unpack that for a while around hunters that are successful, hunters that quit, hunters that are physically or mentally ready for the trips. Because you've seen so many hunters over the years with that business, what were some of the themes that became obvious around the hunters that were going to thrive in the backcountry versus the hunters that were going to not thrive and probably bonk in the backcountry mentally and physically?
Right. Just a great question, man, because I got where I would, analyze it over time because it's people, that kind of hunting, that wilderness stuff, if you're going guided, you're doing drop camps, you're doing it yourself, I don't think people really talk about the real statistics, right? Of how many people quit early on those hunts.
Yeah.
I mean, across the board, all those different categories, even the toughest do-it-yourself backpack hunters that are going to go hunt over-the-counter stuff, low draw stuff in Colorado, they'll plan a 7-8 day backpack trip. I guarantee you, if somebody had the data set, less than half of them make it past day 4 or 5.
Man.
And I saw that just, amongst, drop camps that I dealt with, guys that were like semi-guided, but also a lot of my outfitting was in the wilderness. So I saw a lot of the public backpack hunters too. And so you look at that and you're like, well, what differentiates people? One, I'd like to prepare, my future clients so they know, what would be factors that they can think about. And then outside of that, just out of curiosity, right? Like what distinguishes the difference between folks? Because what I found, man, is that on the physical front, like the physical fitness front, and I can talk about this intimately with when I was guiding individuals, like if I'm guiding goat hunters, sheep hunters, that sort of thing. So without a doubt, a guy who's better physically prepared, he on average is going to hunt, he's going to hunt more efficiently, he's going to last longer on hunts. And all this stuff happens when the hunting's not real good, right? Anybody can get through a 2-day hunt and kill an elk on the second day. And like, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the hunts that drag on, where like you go through these waves of up and down physically and psychologically. And so, being physically prepared does matter, but I'm amazed how many guys, and it wasn't necessarily, I mean, they could be heavy and out of shape, but even more so older guys. Like I guided a lot of guys who were 65, 70 years old. I packed out a lot of elk for guys that were 65, 70 years old that were studs. And they were going from day 0 to day 7 to the last day of the hunt, no matter what. And what they didn't do is they weren't guys that just said that without any sort of planning. You know what I mean, Dustin? They weren't like, oh, I'm going the whole way no matter what. That's not really, the key component of it was, a lot of them, what I found is that, yeah, some of them maybe figured out their first hunt. A lot of them figured out like their 4th or 5th hunt and getting halfway through hunts and figuring this all out. But a lot of them had like a master plan in terms of just managing themselves during the hunt. And this is going to sound probably very petty to people, but the stuff like sleep, the stuff like nutrition when you're on the mountain, that stuff makes a huge difference, man.
Yeah.
Like in particular when you add in altitude. And I'm telling you, like the guys who stay 8, 9 days, when you talk to them, you're like, hey, how'd you sleep last night? They're like, good. The guy that after 2 or 3 days, he's like, man, I haven't slept good in 2 days. That guy, you like that has to get dealt with, or he's not going to make it past like 4 or 5 days.
Yep.
Because your brain, it's crazy to me. So 2 things. Guys get up in the altitude, they can't sleep, and then they quit eating. And they're like working off calories. And so they get into a calorie deprivation state or deprived state, and they just don't have the appetite and they're not sleeping at night. Man, if you have those 2 things, it is hard. I don't care how tough you are. I don't care what your background is and whatever. If you're not taking care of those 2 things, I'm not saying you can't mentally do a Goggins pull through thing. Like people can do it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying on average, people cannot do it. If you don't sleep for 2 nights and you're 1,500 calories short for 2-3 days, good luck.
Yeah.
The best way to up your average to get longevity through your hunting is to take care of those 2 things. Like I tell guys, hey, if I'm going to guide you on a backpack sheep hunt, do not show up and never have slept on your pad, like your backpack sleeping pad, because then you'll sleep on it and you're like, oh, this thing's noisy. Like a couple of the best ones are very noisy.
Yeah.
And if you move, they wake you wide awake. And I've had that several times, like guiding studs, like guys who have hunted, a ton of different species, a ton of different places, but I'm guiding them on a hunt where they have to backpack hunt, right? Like we have to do it given the logistics. And 2.5 days in, they're like, they want to quit. And it's like, and they always have a bunch of other excuses. Nobody says, dude, I'm going to quit because I can't sleep and I'm hungry, because that's not what their brain's telling them. Their brain's telling them like, hey, you just need to get home because something's not right. So they manifest all this other crap and they use that to convince themselves to go to the exit. Whereas if you just manage like these utility components, a lot of times that urge to go for the exit won't ever arrive. The other thing is I notice, man, you've probably noticed this with hunting with other people, is some people can recognize it. Like I personally can recognize it. Like I'm not immune to feeling that that urge to bitch out. Like I'm not immune to that at all, but I recognize it early on. And for me personally, like diet's a very big part of that. I can easily go through a day when I'm guiding at altitude and forget to eat.
Yep.
Easy. Like I do it all. And so I have like a little system. Like I have a bag. I pack my food in it before I even go on the hunts. In that bag, if I look at it at 3:00 and that bag's not like getting close, I'll eat it, even if it feels like I'm gonna throw up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I got to eat that bag. But a lot of times, like I'll feel like, hey, I'm not feeling quite right. Like I feel that kind of quitting urge. And it's like the last thing I want to do now is intake calories, but I'm going to do it. I'll do it. And it fades away. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those are factors. And then the other big factor, man, is it's like totally off the wall, but empirically, I think it's the case, is people's home life, right? Their work life and whatever stress they got at home. If a guy shows up to, get packed in, shows up to the lodge, And the first thing he asked me is like, "Hey, I got, I like what's the internet password here?" Or, or
It's
I
trouble.
just got off the phone with my wife and she's upset about this or that. High potential for crapping out. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's
So those are the
fascinating.
big ones.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the same things over the years around kind of those micro wins of when you're feeling it yourself, when you're feeling some of those psychological effects, which I think just that alone, just that awareness that you mentioned
Sure.
is huge, because that awareness, we're all going to have good days and bad days, and we're all going to have parts of those days where we feel good and don't feel good. But having the awareness to know that you're you need something to keep you going out there for 3 or 4 or 5 more days, and knowing that that might be starting to slip is huge. And I think looking for
Yeah.
those micro wins of like, I'm going to build a fire right now just to warm
Yeah.
up for an
Yeah.
hour or two, or I'm going to have a cup of coffee, or I'm going to eat a whole bunch of gummy bears because I need to finish that bag per day
Yeah.
to make sure I don't go into that calorie deficit. But that awareness is really awesome. It was really interesting because talking to Randy Newberg earlier this year, he says that he's talked about this a few times, that he really wishes he was as mentally tough in his 30s as he is in his late 50s. He's like, I'd give anything to be as mentally tough looking back in hindsight in my 30s as I am in my late 50s. He's like, in my
Sure.
30s, I was mentally weak, is what he says, which is so interesting because most people think it is the opposite. And you started the conversation there that it's like these older guys that come in with a plan and this mindset that they're going to be there the whole week. They've already made that decision. The decision's already been made. They're going to go 7 days. And that's kind of the level that Randy is talking about as well, that he also backs it up with like, life is short, and how many of these hunts do we have left? I'm going to take full
Sure.
advantage of every single day and every single opportunity. But I think part of that, what you're seeing in those older clients too, is planning. Planning goes a long ways in showing up prepared with a plan. You can see the impact of that, of those guys making it longer than some of those other guys.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, it's like it's the planning, but it's also again like that exposure therapy too. They know it's not going to be it's not going to be all good,
Hmm.
And I think that for particularly for people who are very new to like to backpack hunting in particular, man, I'm sure you in your business you talk to lots of these guys and they've been looking at gear for 9 months, optimizing their gear, and they've probably been optimizing their physical fitness, all of that stuff, and over that path they start to believe that the hunt is going to be all up. You know what I mean? It's just going to be
Mm,
like all positivity. And I think literally just realizing that, man, you're going to have some downs is a huge
hmm.
win. And any old guy who's been on 25 elk hunts, he knows that. Like he
Yeah.
knows that it's gonna be ups and downs and he's gonna see it coming. Um, and just like recognizing what to do at those moments when you get one of those downs, I think is just kind of something that you iterate on over time and you figure out. But you nailed it when it's like you take the time to deal with it. And for some reason, man, it tends to be the thing that you don't want to do at that time, or it's just you
Hmm.
you're you don't have a preference to do it. The best analogy that I can use in my life, because this kind of thought process I think applies to even like we were talking about life and business and whatever, even to that stuff, right? Like last night, my wife makes this she makes like a it's like a oh, it's like a stir fry, but she uses cauliflower flour rice in
Oh
it, and
yeah.
it doesn't go well with me, right? And I woke up this morning feeling like crap. I have a bunch of stuff on my plate. I've got this podcast to do, and I'm feeling like a mess right now, and I know it was because of that.
Yeah.
And I know I'm really into calisthenics. Like I just basic stuff,
Yeah.
rings and pull-ups. That's like my fitness routine for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I know that if I just start on like I just lay my sets out for the day, right? And I
Yeah.
I kind of do like I'm sure you're familiar with Pavel,
Hmm.
like his way of, so I'll do sets throughout the day. I'm like, man, if I just do two of these pull-up sets today, right now, it'll turn it around. But it's like the last thing I want to do because my stomach's all messed up.
Yeah.
Sure enough, power through it, and then after it, I feel better. Like it
Hmm.
works. But the only reason I can get through doing it is I know it's gonna fix it,
Yeah.
But my body's telling me like, dude, that's the last thing you should do. You should go sit on your ass. You know what I mean? So I think it's very analogous to that. A lot of times it's exactly what you don't want to do.
Well, and movement, yeah, movement just kind of shakes some of that stress off and gets
Yeah,
like some of that dopamine going and gets you past that stress point. And it is so cool to take backcountry hunting analogies and quickly realize how it is the exact same thing that's happening in our lives. Where
sure.
where you talked about where a lot of hunters are going to show up and think it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows and relatively easy. That same thing happens to all of us in our lives, and it is the concept of when you think life is going to be easy and then you get punched in the face, it hurts really, really bad because you're like, oh, I thought this was supposed to be a lot easier. I thought I was supposed
Sure.
to not struggle. But in life, at home, family, business, if instead it's like life is supposed to be hard, like we were built for battle, we were made for battle, life is supposed to be full of struggle, but really we're supposed to know how to struggle well. Then when you get punched in the face, it doesn't hurt as bad because it's like, well, life is supposed to be hard. But I'm
Right, sure.
so you can see how backcountry hunting kind of shines a light on that because it's going to bring out those extremes in 7 days. It's going to kind of teach you that principle, but that same
Yeah, oh yeah.
principle, can work in entrepreneurship. The same principle can work in marriage and parenthood as well. I've used a ton of Bluetooth speakers over the years, and they all have never quite had enough output for me to really have an awesome home gym workout on a Bluetooth speaker. But the Turtle Box is in a whole new ball game. They have leveled up this product, so the bass and the output you get out of a Turtle Box is quite amazing. It's funny how we started using them at the lab. We had an awesome sound system at our new lab here in Bozeman. We were using it so much, we actually blew our brand new system out. We went right to the Turtle Boxes. And so we paired two together in the lab. And that was a lot of output for the Mountain Tough team and all of our testing to have phenomenal sound in our gym for a great workout with great music. We know there's a ton of Mountain Toughers training in their basements, in their garages, and I know a lot of you are looking for great sound to play some music in the background to your MGDs or your kettlebell diesel. This is a great product for you to check out. Turtle Box is at a whole new level. The bass and the volume you can get out of that box. It's a sweet product. You guys can check them out at turtleboxaudio.com. Again, that's turtleboxaudio.com. You've been listening to the Mountain Tough Podcast.
It's hard for me to explain this concept, but it's related, man. If you don't have that mindset that, hey, like everything's great now, but we're gonna, I'm open to the fact that, down the road here there might be a challenge. If you're not open to that, it limits your path on an elk hunt, and it limits your path in life, right? If every decision you make is just to optimize the average ease of the next year, I don't think you're going to get I don't think you're going to get what you want out of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're on an elk hunt, a backpack elk hunt, and every choice you make today is to make the afternoon, or this morning is to make the afternoon hunt easier, and the next day easier, and the hunt after that easier, you're probably not going to get out of the hunt what you were hoping for.
Mm-hmm.
I think the analogy is spot on, man. I think that's, and I don't, and I'm not, I don't mean it in the way like when I use it as an analogy for life, I don't mean it in a derogatory way at all. I think that I think people just don't realize that, right? Like if you're
Mm-hmm.
open to the fact that, hey, if I do this, I might have more volatility this next year. It actually gives you so many more options. Like it
Mm-hmm.
gives you a place to maneuver. Whereas if you're always optimizing for ease, you don't have any, you can't maneuver at all. You're just on that path. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense because you can see it in really, really good hunters and in like really good hunting partners. They always are pushing to take the harder route. And
Sure.
they're when you get in that environment where you're like, probably no one's been down in that canyon because it's so nasty. We should go down there. Or, we should sleep up top on top of this rock tonight so that we're in the right place in the morning rather than down
Yeah.
in the meadow. When you get those hunting partners and you're pushing and pushing for everything needs to be harder. We need to take the more difficult path. We need to get the thought of comfort off of our brain. Those are the best trips you've ever been on in your life. The experiences you
Oh
see
yeah.
on those trips and the hardest hunts we've ever done are the most memorable hunts.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, dude, and I'm thinking you might have like you might have met somebody like I've spent some time with on the like, hey, let's just stay here and sleep next to a rock. Dude, one of I've got a mentor in the hunting world. I've guided a bunch of sheep hunts for him, with him. He has
Hmm.
no social media. I'm not going to mention his name because he doesn't want any social media or anything, any recognition. But I remember hunting with him, man, on a pretty tough sheep hunt. We got on some rams with the client, and we were just day hunting, like big day hunts from
Yeah.
trailheads. This area's got roads all over it.
Yeah.
But so we just had our day hunting stuff in our packs, but it was all high altitude stuff. And I remember, we're watching these rams right as the sun goes down. Like, no way we can kill one that night. We're just too far and too much terrain between us. And he looks at me and he's like, "Oh yeah, let's just sleep here." And I'm thinking like, what are you talking about, man? Like, I'm not sleeping here.
Didn't
Like,
bring anything.
I don't have anything, Like we got a lighter to start a fire. That's pretty much it. And then a
Yeah.
couple extra layers. And I realized like he's dead serious. He's like, well, and he's not like really fretting to explain it to him. He's like, no, dude, let's sleep here because we might lose these rams and we're gonna have to hike back in here tomorrow. And
Hmm.
I'm like, dude, we don't have any way of staying here. And the client's like looking at me like wide-eyed, like, what's this guy talking about? And it struck me like, okay, one, he's right.
Hmm.
Because the chances of us having like a physical threat to our life or something by staying here tonight are really low. Like we can start a fire, it's gonna be miserable. We're probably not gonna sleep very much, but we're gonna kill one of these rams in the morning if we stay here.
Yeah.
And he's completely right about that. And then the other thing I realize is that he has done this so many times that this is not a big deal.
Just not even
And
scared of
yeah,
it.
yeah, and he's opened that part of his toolbox or developed that part of his toolbox up until that day, Dustin. If I wasn't planning on staying a night on the mountain, I don't care what the situation was, I wasn't staying a night on the mountain, period.
Hmm.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like that would have been an insane idea. Like for me to crash up there next to some Rams, even though it made logical sense. Like there's no way I was going to do it. And I think that would go for the vast majority of people who backcountry hunt. The majority of them have not spent an unexpected night out. Like I bet you
Hmm.
it's 95%. But in those situations where there's no physical threat or whatever, like why not? And the
Yeah.
reason why not is because they never done it before. And they've
Hmm.
never like powered through a night, woke up in the morning, that next morning the Rams were obviously there. We shot one of them. We packed it out. Like they've never done that and been like, "Oh, that works." And guess what? Like there's no harm to
Yeah.
us, you know? And
Yeah.
it's like, and you deal with what you have, right? Like I remember he had like part of his little snack pack. I had part of mine. We had like a Cliff Bar and like what other crap we could scrounge out of our bag. We just had to make it through one night.
Hmm.
But that's just an example. Like this guy, no big deal because he's done it a bunch of times. He thinks we're idiots. I'm thinking he's an idiot. But once I figured out, like, yeah, he's got a point,
Yeah.
then that becomes part of what you're capable of. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's kind of wild.
Oh, it's so awesome because it is, one of the ways that mental toughness can be described is turning ceilings into floors. And that's kind of exactly what happened to you and your client that day, is because you think of a thing, an item in life, an event, an obstacle, a physical task as your ceiling, where
Right.
like, no, I'm not sleeping here without my gear. But then you do it and that actually becomes a floor. It's not your ceiling anymore because you're like, I did it. It wasn't as bad as I thought. I'm still alive. And it worked. We didn't have to
Yeah,
exert
sure.
all that extra mileage to get back up here. And you see it all the time in the physical realm too. Like someone will say, the longest I can run is a 5K. Then they'll do the 5K, and now they're running 10Ks. Because they're doing 10Ks, they sign up for that half marathon.
Right.
And so it's just these ceilings turning into floors over and over again. And that's why at Mountain Tough, we spend a lot of time encouraging so many people to look for hard things and always be doing something hard every day and looking for challenging ways to push their limits mentally and physically. Because I think earlier in our conversation, we do see a lot of guys that are looking at, the best boot, the best backpack, the best rifle optics. They're doing all this gear planning for their trips. And that some guys are taking it to extreme levels. We joke in the office that like some people ask like, what's the best battery I should put in my headlamp? And you're
Yeah.
like,
Oh
dude,
yeah.
you're like, it doesn't matter. Like
I,
what?
I call I call them gear baiters, and
Yeah.
I mean it as I laugh about it because I do the same. I'll do it too.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'll be like, oh, dude, I'm way over analyzing this. I have to catch myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But the best preparation you can do for a lot of these things is just get out and do hard things all summer, preparing for this
Oh
hunt.
yeah,
Like
sure.
your gear's not as important as like how many hikes have you been on? How many hard hikes have you been on? How many times did you sleep on that mat so that it doesn't shock you come September
Yeah.
and October? And I think it is cool. Like turning ceilings into floors is awesome. And it's like, how else can we apply that to our normal day-to-day lives?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I see it. I don't know if you've ever like done any free diving or breathing or like apnea stuff or whatever. That world, it's so clear in that world, Dustin, because
Hmm.
you know what, like, not to get totally off on a tangent on it, but I told you before, like I'm an obsessive spear fisherman and kind of dove into that world,
Yeah.
and it's very quantitative in that world, right? Like a guy can go free diving a couple times and he's diving to like 20 feet and then 25 feet he's struggling to clear his ears. It's just like the whole thing is so painful to him, and
Hmm.
then around him there's guys free diving 100 feet, 150 feet, and he's like, there's no way I can do that. Like it's physically impossible. That is 100, like 99.9% of people, that is their perception when they get into free diving. Like what they are doing, it's literally physically impossible for me to do that.
Hmm.
And I've seen so many people get into it and they manifest the idea that it's physically impossible for them. Oh, the anatomy of my ears are
Hmm.
different than that guy. Oh,
Hmm.
I just like I'm too old to do that. Like everybody comes up with the same excuses. So the people who've been doing it for a while, they recognize it. And they're just like, yeah, okay, yeah. Like, you're not going to tell the guy he's full of shit, but that's what he's full of shit. Because if he keeps at it, he'll be
Yeah.
diving 80, 90 feet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if the same guy that 3 months ago was saying that I can't do it because, just my, my anatomy is different than you. Like these ridiculous excuses or
Hmm.
stuff that's only going to apply in like
Self-talk.
one out of 10,000
Y-
people or something like that, right?
Yeah.
That same guy has achieved what he thought was literally physically impossible. It's pretty wild.
Oh,
And like not, I wasn't meaning to get off track, but it applies to all the stuff you're talking about.
that's the perfect example because you're seeing those black and white ceilings being turned into floors, right? With
Yeah,
like data behind it. I remember Remy Warren told me we were talking about mental toughness last year on the podcast in Mountain Hunter mental toughness, and he brought up the same story. He said, one of the best things I've ever done in my life for mindset is go to a free diving school and
sure.
just learning how to like calm down and think and critically think and breathe and plus just like pushing those limits and seeing impossible turned into possible.
Right.
It's super
And I,
cool.
I I think it's because in that particular endeavor, there's like a real empirical quantitative feedback loop that occurs. Like if somebody's holding the watch, you're gonna know that you used to only be able to hold your breath for a minute and a half. Now you just held it for 4 minutes, right?
Hmm.
So there's a feedback loop. But man, I think it applies to all that. Like, elk hunting, same deal. There's not as much of a quantitative feedback loop, but a guy who crapped out day two of a hunt in 2021, just, in 2023, he might have done a 10-day backpack hunt and never sweated, barely sweated it the whole time in
Yeah.
terms of like psychological stress. It's the same kind of like massive jump that we assume when we start we can't achieve.
Mm.
Um, it's just interesting because it's like your brain is literally saying I cannot do that, but you can. You might not, you got to, maybe there's some skill set building, maybe there's some just callousing in terms of, mental preparation, that sort of thing. But generally you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to watch how you've kind of built your life around adventure and taking some of these risks to set up a lifestyle that has abundant adventure around it. And
Sure.
a lot of people aspire for that and want that. And at the same time, I think that, there's a lot of men that are struggling that don't necessarily know that's why they're struggling is lack of adventure in the outdoors in their life. Do you think that like has that always been an intentionality? Like you're intentionally setting up your life to make sure there's abundant adventure around you?
Yeah. So I uh I guess I have to answer this one, Dustin, in a very like idiosyncratic way to myself. Because I think that, probably some people have a very similar personality to me and some people don't.
Mm.
So I can only speak for myself. But even at the microcosm level, like the last 3 or 4 days, I was traveling up to the States that like 10 days ago. I was there for a while. So I got behind on a bunch of editing work for my YouTube channel and other stuff. So I
Hmm.
spent 4 days, just, not doing adventurous stuff, just editing, catching up on emails, all of that stuff. And literally it clicks in my mind like, okay, I'm feeling like crap. Like I feel low energy. I feel like all these business things that I want to achieve are all of a sudden very difficult for me. And
Mm.
it clicks to me like, Cliff, like you need to go like take one of your daughters and go lobster diving this morning, or,
Yeah.
you know, call one of your buddies on the other side of the island and schedule go spearfishing tomorrow or something. Cause I have to like re-click it. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Because if I can re-click it and get, away from it for just a moment, I'll come back to, my career stuff, my office part of my existence,
Yeah.
and everything will be much easier. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna nail this goal, that goal, whatever. So for me, it's been like that up until or back, the original more like macro story of my life and how I ended up here instead of finance for the same reason.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like I have to have that component in my life. I think you're probably right in the sense that to varying degrees that applies to everybody. I don't know. I always talk about it in the context of men, because 99% of my clients have been men.
Yeah.
The world that I operate in is men for the most part in hunting. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it just applies to men or not, but I can tell you it's a very significant part of a lot of men's life, right? Like I feel like a lot of people I know who might be struggling with things, again, it's like back to the fact that I can take a guy who's struggling and maybe like his primary hobby is, gaming or something like, and no offense to people who are like into gaming, but man,
Yeah.
like a grown man who his only hobby is gaming, most of the ones I know are not real happy or they're like struggling or whatever. If I can convince that guy to go do an adventure with me, and the problem is it's really hard to convince that guy to do it because it's the last thing he wants to do, right? He's
Yeah.
out of shape, the
Energy's
all
low.
sort, yeah. Yeah, if it's spearfishing, it's like little stuff, man. Like he may be a grown man be embarrassed to put a wetsuit on a boat because he's fat or whatever. Like all those things matter. And I get it. Like it's a real struggle, but if he can power through that, like like if he picks up the hobby or if it's just that one time adventure and he decides, man, I'm going to do this more often in the future,
Mm.
it will like it'll click a guy into a happier state of existence.
Yeah.
Not to be too woo woo, but I know for a fact for most men that does work.
Man.
So that's my thought on it.
Mountain Tough is the fitness app trusted by the dedicated. Mountain Tough ethos is backed by, we've always wanted to be the best in the world at helping our customers become more mentally tough. So inside the Mountain Tough app, you're not only going to find all of our physical training programs, but you're going to find additional training as well so that you can stay sharp physically, mentally, spiritually, and nutritionally. The Mountain Tough app also allows you to train no matter where you are, anytime, anywhere. Additionally, the Mountain Tough app is going to have programs from beginners all the way up to elite athletes. And all of our programming is structured in a way that you can start with no gear at body weight, and you can go all the way up to programming that is full gear. So you can do that in a robust home gym or your local gym. There's no excuse for you not to start today. With Mountain Tough, you can conquer your goals with the ideal program for your lifestyle and schedule. Train with equipment or just your body weight on your phone, tablet, TV, or web browser. Most importantly, Mountain Tough will help you train your mindset so you are always ready for anything life throws your way. Mountain Tough is offering the Mountain Tough podcast listeners an incredible offer. 6 weeks free on the Mountain Tough app. All you need to do is use the code MTNPOD to redeem your 6 weeks of training. That'll be a 14-day free trial plus a whole additional 4 weeks of training. Just go to mountaintough.com and enter code MTNPOD for your 6 weeks free on the best-in-class physical and mental training app. You've been listening to the Mountain Tough podcast. I so strongly feel that any dude who's out there who's struggling, if they just did 4 days in the backcountry, 3 days, 2 days, left their phone at home, they don't have to hunt. It doesn't have to be hunting season. It doesn't matter where you live in the world.
Sure.
You can find some sort of backcountry, whether that's Montana backcountry or the swamps of Florida. But if you camp out overnight, 2 days without your phone, it's going to click it back in. I mean, you're going to come back a different dude after just doing that, which is, there's not many hacks in life that are that simple. Like,
no, yeah.
Just go somewhere for 2 days without your phone and camp out, and
Yeah.
go somewhere that scares you just a little bit, and
Yeah.
you'll come back a different person.
Yeah, the I think the challenge, man, is it sounds is like a real simple hack, but it's like the exact thing that a lot of guys don't want to do, man.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's like I don't know what it is, the physiological component or whatever, and I can't exclude myself from that, man. Like the example I use is if I'm busy and I got like these things I need to get done for
Mm,
whatever I'm trying to do in life, business or whatever, I kind of don't want to go, I don't want to disrupt it and go do an adventure, but I'll push through it and do it because I know it'll change things. Um, it's interesting, man. I don't know if I mean, the natural progression of the conversation is why is that? And I don't know. I mean, is it because just we've evolved for that to be a part of our life? I don't know. That's the only theory that I can think is probably part of it, you know?
I think some of it's chemical too, because like
Oh, sure.
if you're doing work stress and a lot of screen time and indoor time, you're gonna have probably a slow cortisol drip going on, and that cortisol is gonna like kill your testosterone and your drive, and your energy levels are gonna be low. So in your lowest of low, the thought of going outside doesn't going out and
Yeah, yeah.
camping for 2 days doesn't sound like you don't have the energy to get that ship off the ground. And I think it's because of that chemical imbalance.
Yeah, yeah.
You gotta like just I think guys out there gotta just force it or find every way they can to force it. And just
Yeah.
like you probably saw that with outfitting and guiding. I'm sure you saw a lot of life change over that decade because like booking a hunt or booking a trip is one good way to force that because if
Oh,
you're
sure.
because like you swiped your card, you paid your deposit, so now you're gonna show up even if you're feeling kind of low.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a lot of times that's why people will book hunts. They're like, dude, I want to make it a thing that's on the calendar, and now I spent the money and I've got to do it for sure.
Hmm.
I think there's something to that. But man, your explanation makes a lot of sense, man, because I I constantly bring it up to my wife. I'm like, man, because I've always lived a life where part of my career or part of my job was physical. Like if you're guiding, like
Hmm.
you're out, you're getting tons of exposure to the outdoors all the time.
Yeah.
You're getting exercise during the season, all of that. But the most exhausted I will get is if I've been on a freaking computer 10 hours. I'm like, how am I exhausted? I've been sitting on my ass for 11 hours or 10 hours a day. And
Yeah.
I'm not haven't done anything physical. And at the end of the day, I just you feel drained. And I don't mean like your brain, I mean like your whole body. And
Yeah.
your explanation makes perfect sense, is that you're just, it's constant little drips of stress hormones, basically.
Yeah. Lack of vitamin D too.
Sure. Yeah. It's amazing.
What did you see over the years that in kind of your experience that what are some of the characteristics that just made a great hunting partner to be with?
Yeah, so I mean, I think well, 100% the best uh aspect of like a good client or hunting partner, really they're the same thing, right? A lot
Yeah.
of a lot of my old clients, Dustin, are my best friends to this
Hmm.
day, and I'll hunt with them just on, my own individual hunts a lot. But the primary thing is just it's cliche, but it's positivity, right?
Mm.
If I take a guy outside of all the, block and tackle stuff we talked about, just, the before, taking care of yourself and that sort of thing and being prepared, positivity matters a lot in the sense that I remember guiding folks, and if I went up into like the flat tops wilderness with somebody and rode up there with a pack string, and in the first 48 hours they never said to me like, man, this country is beautiful or this view is amazing, outside of the hunting aspect of
Mm.
it, if that never, like, literally never came out verbally, I knew that, hey, like, this guy might be a struggle to hunt with because
Yeah.
he's not taking into account that, like, what we're doing right now is amazing. And then the inverse is true. All of the best hunters I know, the best partners I know, the best clients I know up in the woods are guys, and I try to encompass this myself, and I think at some level it even comes across as like corny to people that I'm around. But man, if I go somewhere new, it doesn't matter if it's elk hunting, spear fishing, whatever. I try to look around and be like, this is awesome. Because what I'm doing is like, is just a reflection of the fact that I'm blessed to be able to do it. Like
Hmm.
a lot of people on this planet, man, they're like the idea of going on a camping trip in the wilderness, there's no way they're ever going to be able to do it in their whole life,
Yeah.
you know? And so I try to put it, in that lens of like, these are epic trips, man.
Mm.
Everything that we're talking about is a blessing. And it's like when you start a trip, particularly these like nostalgic elk hunts that are up in the wilderness or something, enjoy the fact that you're there because you're like a lucky person just to be there.
Yeah.
And that makes good hunting partners, just that positivity. So I know it's a corny one, but it absolutely works. And it works for me too. Like it works for the individual. If you
Yeah.
decide to draw some energy and outside of just the hunt, like, hey, I haven't seen any elk yet, I haven't seen any sheep yet, that sort of thing, you try to draw some energy just from the fact you're there in the surroundings. you're it's it's just a positive experience for everybody you're hunting with, man. And if you look at people who get invited on hunts consistently, they're that type of guy. They're
Yeah.
a guy who doesn't bitch. If
Yeah.
you verbally bitch, you're not going to get invited to a lot of hunts. You
Bring
know what I mean?
for sure.
It's simple. It's as simple as that.
Man, it's such a good mindset hack too. It's called some people call it pessimistic optimism, and that's a little bit different than what you're talking about, but very closely related, where a lot of folks passing like special forces selection have this, a lot of first responders have this, and then a lot of great hunters have this. And it's the same thing as having that optimistic positive mindset, but it's applying that even on steroids when things get really nasty and hard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like
It
a
comes across as sometimes a burst of sense of humor
yeah,
is involved. Yeah, yeah. Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So
Yep.
it's like when that blizzard is just dumping and someone will be like, well, at least it's not -20. It's only
Yeah,
-10.
yeah.
But it's crazy how good that works. It's like,
Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah, like this is awesome. And we are so blessed to have this opportunity. I mean, just blessed to have like the legs and the lungs to be in this country and be doing
Sure.
what less than 1% of the population will ever get to see and do. And just
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah.
being so grateful for it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's huge. It's a woo woo one and a corny one, but it works. You
Yeah.
know.
Have you ever had a like on the mountain do like a mental reset on yourself or mental reset in life where you're just kind of at a rock bottom moment?
I'm trying to think about that. I mean, I had a lot. In a microcosm sense, like in the hunting context, I had that a lot guiding
Hmm.
and outfitting, man. Because it's one thing, you know, like since I sold my outfitting business, I've been doing a lot of, just guiding for friends and ranches and that sort of thing. And just going and guiding people, I really enjoy it. It's easy, simple. I think probably just part of it is a function of my experience doing all sorts of different type of hunts and that sort of thing. So I can be comfortable in most environments and have a good time.
Hmm.
But when I was outfitting, man, and when I was in, these pack-in wilderness camps, wall tent camps, and we had 20 horses and mules in camp and 8 clients and, a cook and 3 guides and that sort of thing. I used to have damn near mental breakdowns a lot,
The pressure.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's because like, and people can really get, the problem in those situations is that there's a real risk that somebody outside of people maybe getting upset because the elk hunting's tough, things I can't control. There's also things that people can get hurt. They can get hurt by the horses. They can get hurt by falling. All sorts of crazy things. It's a very uncontrolled environment.
Yeah.
I think if you're type A slash OCD, like it's not a cortisol trickle. It's like a cortisol
Dump.
hose. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
So yeah, I used to have those moments, and it would always happen at night, usually during archery season, because people don't realize this, but archery season is the hardest time to outfit and guide because your days are so long.
Yeah.
So if you got, you get home late in the dark, then you got to take care of horses, then you got to eat. I mean, you're getting 4 hours of sleep a night. That'll drag on you in those environments. You haven't taken a shower in 2 weeks, like that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
So it always happened at a period of time at night. And I think for me, the solution was always to look at it and be like, look, I can't, I can't call my wife. I can't call my dad. I can't call anybody to bail me out. Like everything could be falling apart in this camp, and this guy could hate this guy. And, it turns out the cook's a drunk, and I got to solve it because there's no solution, dude. Like nobody's coming up here to help me, period.
Yeah.
And so that's really how I dealt with it. To be awesome is realizing that, hey, like the only way to dig myself out of this is to wake up in the morning and incrementally figure out how to make this situation better, So that's how, I don't know if that'll work for everybody, but for me, the idea that, hey, like this is me to dig out of in those situations. And the only way to do it is tomorrow I'm going to fix one thing and then another thing and then another thing. That's the only way I could do it. And that probably applies to life too. I can't really think of a time that I've thought about it in the context of life, either where I felt, real low on life and did the same thing, but in the world of hunting for sure.
Yeah.
Dealt with that a lot in the business, But yeah, that's my thoughts on that, man. I don't, for better or worse, when I do have rough spots in life, I think that I've, all the different things that we've discussed, I think I've figured out a way to maneuver through that, at least so far. So I'm grateful for that,
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's a really good story because it's kind of like what you were doing there in those outfitting camps was, I think, eliminating, like being a victim, eliminating the victim mentality. And
sure,
that's so helpful because I think it's like that. There's a bumper stickers and stickers that are on water bottles that say, no one is coming. It's up to us.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, it's so true. It's like, it is up to us. And also what you were doing there was just going right to a solution mindset. I mean, instead of focusing on the problem, you're focusing on like, what is just one thing I could do to make this better, this situation better?
Right.
Man, that's cool.
Yeah, no, for sure. And now that you kind of like, I think that's probably how I probably apply the exact same thing to life. You know what I mean? Is, my life's not perfect, man. There's things I want to improve right now, and that's about how I think about it. The same way,
Yeah, I know. That's what's cool about hunting is it like the principles are easy to see on hunts, but those same principles, you can use them everywhere. It's
Sure.
wild.
Yeah, no, totally agree.
Well, Cliff, thanks so much for your time, man. I really appreciate you jumping on the show and appreciate you and the opportunity. And any closing words for the men out there?
No, man, other than this has been a super fun one, dude. Like I've done a ton of podcasts.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like 100 probably. And I don't think a lot of the questions you've had were new. So I like it, man. I think we did a mix of things that made me think about things a lot. Dude, the biggest takeaway I think for anybody is, and we hit on it a bunch, is like, it may be hard for you to go take on an adventure or, make a decision or whatever. And if it's like the hardest thing in your mind to do, you might really want to consider that it's might be the best thing, So that'd be my big takeaway for folks. And that's what I try to think about too. So yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. It was awesome.
Yeah. Likewise. I love your feedback and your answers. And I think unpacking that adventure and mindset for guys is super helpful. I know it'll help some listeners out there, and appreciate you, man, and hope to see you in the States somewhere soon.
Oh yeah. Only got a couple more weeks down here, man. I'll be back to spring bear guiding, and then fall's just right around the corner. So I'll be up there, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dustin. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. What a phenomenal conversation with Cliff. There is a lot of gold in that conversation to apply to your life. We talked a lot about these principles that hunting teaches us. They're the same principles that we can use every day, whether that's at home, at business, at work, in your family, being a husband, wife, a better father, mother, friend, employee, boss. These same principles work. So Cliff broke a few of those down. The best hunting partners are optimistic. They're not going to go down that negative route. So how can you be optimistic to those around you all day, every day, whether that's at work or at home? That optimistic energy will create that positive snowball. He talked a lot about getting outside. And if it's something that looks really hard for you, that is probably because it's the most important thing you could do right now. So book that trip, book that adventure, go camp outdoors without your phone, go on a hike, get that vitamin D. Even if it sounds like that's the last thing in the world you want to do right now, it's probably because of that cortisol drip. There's probably a chemical imbalance, which means it's the most important thing you can do. And I really loved Cliff's life journey. He was stuck in that great job, financial trading, but he knew he was missing something, and he acted on that feeling, and he went back to Colorado and got back to what fills his cup. What a great story. Thanks for being here. If you want to learn more about Cliff, you can check him out on Instagram at Cliff Gray. You can also check out all his YouTube content. He does have a big killer YouTube channel. He's investing a lot of time there on his YouTube channel at Cliff Gray, or his website is pursuitwithcliff.com. Thanks for listening to the Mountain Tough podcast. As always, those rankings and reviews mean a ton to us. So if you could take a second and give the show a ranking on or a review on the podcast store of your choice, those mean the world to me and the Mountain Tough team. And then if you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, make sure you do that. We're spending a lot more time driving Mountain Tough content onto the YouTube channel. There's some really cool stuff over there if you haven't checked it out. And that's at Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. Stay dangerous, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Mountain Tough podcast. We'll see you next week.